All right, let's jump right into this. Today, we're digging into a really fascinating source that offers, well, a pretty radical new perspective on how we can break free from those recurring crises. The ones we see in our own lives and all over the world. I mean, have you ever felt like you're just trapped in a loop? You know that feeling, right? One problem finally gets sorted out and then boom, another one. Sometimes the exact same one just pops right back up. It's this feeling of being completely stuck. And that is exactly the problem our source material is tackling head on. So the big question is, how do we get out of it? Well, the text we're digging into suggests a path that goes way beyond the usual solutions. The material stuff we always try. It points us toward what it calls a spiritual way forward. Okay, so let's really break this down. The source argues that a permanent solution, and that's the key word, permanent, isn't going to be found in politics or economics. Instead, it says we need to search for these things called life-governing principles. The text suggests these principles are found in sacred works, and it specifically mentions one called the Grail Message as a kind of guide to understanding them. And this really sets up a fascinating contrast, doesn't it? It's like two different ways of searching for knowledge. On one hand, you've got what the text calls the common search, which, let's be honest, is mostly about material stuff, right? Getting more things, more comforts. But then on the other hand, it says our original instinct, something deep inside us, is actually for something else entirely, a spiritual awakening, a desire to figure out what our real duties are in the grand scheme of things. Okay, so let's move on because this is where things start to get really, really interesting. The source introduces a key concept, and honestly, it's a bit of a mind-bender, about a kind of hidden law of creation that shapes our reality, and it all comes down to the power of our thoughts. I mean, we all get this, right? It's basic cause and effect. Our actions have consequences. Simple enough. And of course, we also know our words can be incredibly powerful. They can build people up or, completely tear them down. Okay, but here's where this source takes a really sharp turn. Beyond our actions, beyond our words, what about our thoughts? The silent stuff that just happens in our heads. What role do they actually play? And this brings us to the absolute core idea. The quote says, not just our actions and words, but also our thoughts trigger these laws into effect. Now, just let that sink in for a second. That's a huge claim. It's saying that our inner world, the things we just think, are actively shaping our reality, that they're plugging into these natural laws. And this is why the source calls it a sobering recognition. I mean, think about it. Most of us go through life assuming our thoughts are private, right? Harmless. But if they're not, if they're an actual creative force, well, according to the text, that starts to explain a lot about how certain behaviors spread and why these crises keep happening. So if our thoughts really do have that kind of power, it completely changes how we have to look at crises, doesn't it? It leads to this really radical reframing of adversity. It's about looking at a crisis not as a disaster, but as a hidden opportunity. So according to this text, what is a crisis? Well, it's not just a struggle. It's an opportunity to learn, to have a spiritual awakening, and to actually mature. I mean, that completely flips the script on what it means to face a challenge, right? And to kind of bring this idea down to earth, the source uses an analogy we can all get. It points out that even in the real world, in business or politics, who are the great leaders? They're the ones who can see the opportunity hidden inside a crisis. So the question becomes, why can't that same principle apply to every single one of us in our own lives? So you might be asking, who exactly gets this opportunity to learn and grow? Well, according to the text, the answer is everyone. The perpetrators, the victims, and even those of us just watching from the sidelines. Every single person involved gets a chance for what it calls spiritual regeneration. Nobody is left out. Okay, so that's the big idea, right? The theory. But how do we actually apply this perspective in our day-to-day lives? Well, this final section of the text gives us a new kind of call to action. Now, this might be the most challenging piece of advice in the whole text, so buckle up. It says that a serious spiritual seeker has to learn to fight the urge to jump on the bandwagon of any struggle. Think about that. Even when we see something that looks totally unjust, the first step isn't to just dive into the fight. It's to resist that immediate emotional reaction. So what does this new response actually look like? Well, the source lays out a 4-step process. First, you resist that urge to just jump in. Then, from that calmer place, you seek the real lesson inside the crisis. After that, you broaden your view and see the potential for growth for everyone involved. And finally, and this is so important, you take action by offering help to ease the suffering. And that last step is absolutely crucial because it shows this whole approach isn't about being passive. It's not about just letting bad things happen. The source is super clear on this. Offering help is the active part. It's how we actually learn and teach love. And what's more, by doing that, we start to fix the very things in ourselves that might have helped cause the crisis to begin with. And that brings us to the end, and really to this one final powerful question that this whole perspective leaves us with. What if? What if our greatest challenges, those repeating cycles of crisis we all face, what if they are actually our greatest opportunities? It's definitely something to think about.